The applause hit like a wave. My parents stood up together, smiling wide. My mother clapped with both hands raised. My father held his phone high, recording. My sister stood under the lights, calm and glowing. Her name was called again. People cheered louder the second time. I stood near the back wall, half hidden by a coat rack. My jacket was folded over my arm. The program rested against my chest. My name was printed near the bottom. It was spelled wrong. When the applause faded, my parents rushed forward. They hugged her. They laughed and posed for photos. They walked right past me. My mother said, "We'll talk later." We didn't. And in that moment, with everyone celebrating, I finally understood where I stood. My parents liked to tell people we were a close family. They said it at holidays. They said it to neighbors. They said it whenever someone else was listening. Inside our house, closeness showed itself in smaller ways. At the dinner table, my sister's chair was always closer to my parents'. When she talked about her day, my father leaned in. My mother asked questions and smiled at the right moments. When I talked, forks scraped plates. Someone reached for a glass. The conversation shifted without stopping. No one told me to be quiet. No one told me I was interrupting. They just didn't pause for me. If my sister forgot her lunch, my mother drove it to school without complaint. If I forgot mine, my mother said it was a lesson I needed. When my sister got sick, plans were canceled. Appointments were rescheduled. The house slowed down. When I got sick, the TV stayed on. Dinner still happened. Life moved forward. On my sister's birthdays, there were balloons, friends, and photos taken from every angle. My parents planned weeks ahead and talked about it often. On mine, there was cake after dinner. Sometimes candles. Sometimes not. I learned how to smile and say thank you even when something felt missing. By middle school, the pattern had settled into place. My sister had confidence. I had discipline. Teachers praised my grades. My parents praised my sister's personality. At family gatherings, relatives asked about her future. They asked about her dreams. They asked where she saw herself going. When they asked about me, my parents smiled politely and said, "She's doing fine." Fine became my role. I stopped correcting them. I stopped filling in the silence. I learned that staying quiet kept things smooth, and smooth was something my family valued more than truth. High school ended with ceremonies and speeches I barely remember. What I remember is my sister's acceptance letter. My parents taped it to the refrigerator like a prize. They took pictures. They sent them to relatives, friends, anyone who would look. They planned a dinner. My father made a small speech about her future. My mother cried. Everyone clapped. A year later, my acceptance letter arrived in the mail. I placed it on the kitchen counter. My father glanced at it once and nodded. "That makes sense," he said. The letter was never put on the refrigerator. There was no dinner. No pictures. No speech. When it was time for my sister to leave for college, my parents helped her pack. They folded her clothes carefully. They labeled boxes. My mother cried in the parking lot when they dropped her off. She hugged her longer than she hugged me in years. When it was my turn, I packed my car alone. My mother hugged me quickly at the door and said, "Call when you get there." My father checked his watch. I did call. At first. College taught me how to disappear politely. I worked part-time jobs. I paid my own bills. I didn't ask for much. When I called home, the updates were always about my sister. Her classes. Her friends. Her plans. When I talked about my life, there was a pause. Then encouragement. Then a change of subject. After graduation, I moved back home to save money. At least, that was the plan. My sister was already there. She still had her room, her space, her routines. I slept in a converted storage room in the basement. No window. A borrowed mattress. I didn't complain. One night at dinner, my father cleared his throat. He said it was time I started standing on my own. He said it calmly, like advice. My sister was still eating at the table, still being supported, still being asked about her future. I nodded. 2 weeks later, I moved out.
No argument. No announcement.
My mother hugged me and said, You've always been strong. Strength was the word they used when they didn't plan to keep me. The years after I moved out didn't arrive with milestones. They came quietly. I rented small apartments with thin walls and unreliable heat. Places where I learned the sound of my own footsteps. Places where no one asked when I would come home. I worked jobs that paid just enough and demanded more than they promised. Long hours. Quiet offices. I learned how to budget carefully. How to stretch groceries through a week. How to fix a leaky faucet with a borrowed wrench. When something broke, I fixed it. When I was tired, I rested alone. My parents called occasionally, mostly to talk about my sister. Her promotions. Her trips. Her growing confidence. When they asked about me, it was brief. Work's fine, I'd say. That's good, they'd reply. Then, the conversation moved on. Holidays became something I prepared for emotionally. At Thanksgiving, my sister sat next to my parents. I took the seat at the end of the table. I helped in the kitchen. I washed dishes while laughter drifted in from the living room. When relatives asked about me, my parents used the same sentence every year. She's independent. It sounded like pride. It felt like distance. I never corrected them. Instead, I poured myself into my work. I found a field where patience mattered more than charm, where details were noticed, where consistency built trust over time. Years passed. I moved cities for better opportunities. Then, again, when work required it, I didn't announce the moves. I packed quietly and went. Slowly, my life became steady. I had routines that belonged only to me. I had savings. I had nights that ended without tension. I was still present in my family's life, just not centered. Close enough to be mentioned, far enough to be ignored. And in that distance, something unexpected happened. I grew. The call came on an ordinary afternoon. Both my parents were on the line together. Their voices were careful, slower than usual. They said there were family decisions to make. They said it would be easier if I came by in person. When I arrived, they were already seated at the dining table. Papers were stacked neatly in front of them, squared at the edges. Everything looked prepared. My sister wasn't there yet. My father began talking about planning ahead, about keeping things organized for the future. He spoke the way people do when they want something to sound simple. My mother nodded along. She kept her hands folded in her lap. They explained that my sister would be taking on more responsibility going forward. They said she was better with people, better at leading, better at representing the family. Then my father slid a folder toward me. He said it was just paperwork, a formality, something everyone needed to sign. I opened the folder and read every page slowly. No one rushed me. They smiled like this was reasonable, like this was expected. I signed where they pointed. I hugged them both and left. Life went on. Years passed quietly. Then the calls changed. My parents sounded confused, uneasy. They didn't understand the documents anymore. There were questions they couldn't answer. They asked if I could come over. When I arrived this time, my sister was already there. She sat stiffly, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the table. I listened while my parents talked in circles. Then I explained, calmly, line by line. The paperwork they had asked me to sign years earlier didn't give my sister control. It transferred authority into a structure directly tied to my work. Something technical, something specific, something they had never read closely. The room went silent. My mother asked when this had happened. A long time ago, I said. My sister stared at the papers. My father leaned back in his chair. No one raised their voice. The shift didn't happen in that moment. It had already happened. They were only just discovering it. After that meeting, my parents started calling more often. Not to ask how I was doing. Not to hear about my life. They called with questions. They wanted clarification, reassurance, confirmation that things were still under control. Their tone had changed. Careful, measured. They spoke to me the way they used to speak about my sister. With attention, with patience. They told friends and relatives how responsible I was now. How capable. How helpful. It felt strange hearing my name said that way after years of being an afterthought. My sister reached out too. Short messages. Casual calls. She acted like nothing had shifted. Like we had always been on the same level. She talked about future plans. About expectations. I listened. I didn't remind her of the years before. I didn't correct her version of things. When she assumed I would handle something, I paused. I said I would check my schedule. I said I would think about it. The space between messages grew. There were no arguments. Just quiet adjustments. At family gatherings, my parents watched me differently now. They waited for my reactions. They asked for my opinion. They smiled in a way that felt practiced. I noticed it. I didn't respond to it. I showed up when I wanted to. I left when I felt done.
No explanations. No apologies.
They still spoke proudly about my sister in public. They still used my name carefully. The difference was subtle, but it was there. For the first time, their expectations were no longer my responsibility. Time slowed after that. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because I stopped rushing. I no longer rearranged my schedule to attend every gathering. I no longer answered every call right away. When my parents invited me over, I decided based on how I felt, not on obligation. Sometimes I went. Sometimes I didn't.
No explanations.
When I was there, I stayed present but distant. I listened more than I spoke. My mother watched me closely now, like she was trying to read something she had missed for years. One evening, after dinner, she reached for my hand. Her grip was light, uncertain. She said, "We should have done better." I nodded. I didn't comfort her. I didn't argue. I let the sentence exist on its own. After that, nothing changed outwardly, but everything felt different. I stopped shrinking to fit into conversations. I stopped filling silences that weren't mine. My work stayed steady. My home stayed quiet. I learned that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from knowing where you end. My family still maintains their perfect image. They praise my sister loudly. They mention me carefully. And that's fine. I no longer wait to be seen. I didn't win. I didn't lose.
I chose calme. I chose boundary.
And I kept them.